The sun beat down on Banin like molten brass, pouring its weight on the restless city. The streets of Ajegunle pulsed with noise, hawkers crying out their wares, Danfo buses swerving dangerously while conductors shouted, Ojuelegba, Yaba, straight. In the chaos of horns and hustlers, a barefoot boy darted between cars, balancing a wooden tray of roasted groundnuts on his head. His name was Adigun, and though he was no older than 15, his eyes carried a sharpness far beyond his years. Sweat streaked his dusty face as he wove through traffic, dodging impatient drivers who rolled down their tinted windows just long enough to bark, "Move Jer." His voice cracked as he called out, groundnut sweet, well. Some bought from pity, others ignored him as though he were invisible. Yet through the noise and rejection, Adigun's mind was never truly in the street, it was elsewhere, chasing riddles and problems far bigger than hunger. When he returned each evening to the zinc shack he called home, he would reach beneath a broken stool to pull out his most prized possessions, old newspapers, damp with age, their corners curling. To others they were worthless scraps, but to him they were treasure. Inside those papers lay crosswords, Sudoku grids, and brain teasers that had long lost relevance to their original owners. With stubby pencils scavenged from dustbins, Adigun would spend hours wrestling with numbers and words, his lips moving silently as he solved clues meant for university graduates. Hunger gnawed at his belly, yet his mind remained sharp. When he had no puzzles left, he turned cartons into canvases, sketching out what he called inventions. With charcoal, he drew machines powered by bicycle pedals that could grind corn faster, water-pumping devices that didn't need electricity, and even dreamt of cars that could run on sunlight. His neighbors saw him scribbling in the dirt and shook their heads. Adigun, empty stomach, no. Day solve mathematics. They laughed. Better go hustle like your mates. But inside him, a fire burned. He would look up from his carton sketches to the horizon, where the glittering skyline of Banin Island rose like another world. Glass towers caught the sunlight, while at night they shimmered with 1,000 lights. It felt like heaven compared to the rusted zinc roofs and muddy alleys of Ajegunle. His inner voice whispered, "One day, I won't just sell to those people in the towers, I will stand among them." Life in Ajegunle was raw and unkind. Children wrestled in the dust, mothers shouted over buckets of water at the communal tap, and the air often smelled of kerosene stoves mixed with open gutters. But Adigun clung to dignity even in poverty. He washed his single shirt each night, drying it on a rope stretched between wooden poles, determined to face each day looking neat even if he was broke. Then came the day that shifted everything. The afternoon had begun like any other, with Adigun chasing sales between Oshodi and Mile 2. The heat was suffocating, the traffic unbearable. Yet in the middle of a wide junction, a strange sight caught his attention. A massive stage had been set up, flanked by banners and loudspeakers. A crowd gathered around as announcers in matching shirts shouted about a charity event. At the center of the stage stood something unusual, a giant board filled with numbers, letters, and strange symbols. The announcer boasted, "This puzzle challenge was designed by experts. Solve it, and you will win prizes, scholarships, and a chance to be mentored by great leaders." The words barely registered with the restless crowd, who were more interested in the free-branded t-shirts and food being handed out. A few rich kids from Ikoyi and Lekki, dressed in designer sneakers, stepped up to try. One after another, they fumbled and gave up, leaving the puzzle untouched. Adigun's heart raced. His hands grew clammy on the tray of groundnuts. The puzzle called to him every number and symbol, daring him, as though it had been placed there for him alone. Without realizing, he found himself pushing through the crowd, stepping closer. People noticed his ragged shorts and bare feet. Laughter rippled through the crowd. "Ain, see this one. Na puzzle you wan solve?" Someone jeered. Another shouted, "Better go sell your groundnut before e burn." But Adigun barely heard them. His eyes locked on the puzzle like a starving man seeing food. The announcer raised an eyebrow when Adigun climbed the stage. "Young man, are you sure?" he asked, half amused. The crowd roared with laughter, expecting entertainment from his failure. Adigun swallowed hard, setting his tray aside. His knees trembled as he approached the board. He could feel hundreds of eyes on his back, mocking, doubting. For a moment, he thought of stepping down. He thought of his mother's weary face, of neighbors who told him to abandon his foolishness. Then he remembered the nights he spent with worn-out papers, the inventions on cartons, the hunger that never silenced his mind. He whispered to himself, "This is not madness, this is my chance." He stretched out his hand. His fingers, cracked from years of hustling, brushed the smooth surface of the puzzle. The symbols shimmered beneath his touch, waiting. The crowd held its breath. Then the timer began to tick. Chief Damola Adesina's name floated on banners like a signature across the hot afternoon, the sponsor behind the grand challenge and the glittering stage. Television crews angled cranes, microphones dipped, and a presenter rehearsed lines for the charity broadcast going nationwide. The puzzle board stood center stage, a wall of rotating tiles, numeric rings, and sliding glyphs that looked both playful and merciless. Volunteers ushered VIP families to cushioned seats, while the public pressed against plastic barriers. Ajegunle buzzed at the rare spectacle. Cameras, swag, and hope. Somewhere behind the screen, a clock waited, ready to measure genius without pity. Children in bright sneakers clustered near the barricade, their parents murmuring about scholarships, exposure, and photos that would trend. One after another, the rich hopefuls mounted the platform, styluses clipped to tablets, confidence gleaming like cologne. A boy with a foreign accent arranged the first ring, then stalled. A girl in gold bangles chased a pattern, then quit with a practiced smile. Each contestant left with polite applause, a consolation bag, and the private shock of failing on camera. The board waited, unsolved, arrogant, like Banin traffic refusing to move until humility, timing, and courage finally aligned for one soul. Adigun stepped forward from the press of bodies, tray of groundnuts balanced, legs dusty, eyes steady. The laughter came quick and warm like harmattan fire, fed by cruelty and boredom. "See the market, boy," someone shouted. Another voice added, "He go, spoil show." The presenter, trained for spectacle, gestured with theatrical kindness, offering him a chance to step down. Adigun shook his head. He placed the tray carefully by the speaker stand, wiped his palms on his shorts, and faced the board. The cameras found him instantly, framing poverty as content, expectation as entertainment. He inhaled deeply, refusing staged pity. Phones lifted like a field of metallic flowers. Streams went live on every platform that could spin a story. Comments raced ahead of facts. Clown emojis, laughing acronyms, a few soft hearts from strangers who recognized the quiet poise in his face. Adigun heard none of it. He only heard the click inside himself, that small door that opened when numbers and patterns aligned. He had trained for this without mentors, without classes, with nothing but patience and the stubborn desire to understand. The city howled around him. Inside, a cathedral of focus rose. Silence gathered like rain clouds above. He set the outer ring first, rotating tiles by touch as if reading braille written by wind. Corners locked, a sequence surfaced. He traced negative space, noticing what was absent more than present, sliding blocks to create corridors for answers yet unseen. The second ring yielded when he reversed the assumed direction, a lesson learned from repairing jammed zippers in market stalls. Suddenly, the board cascaded possibilities. He paused, recalibrated, and moved again. Quick, precise, reverent, like a tailor sewing with thread made of time. Gasps rose. The presenters exchanged glances, smiling without understanding anything. The clock appeared to hesitate. In a shaded box near the sound booth, Chief Damola watched with professional detachment that loosened into curiosity. He had commissioned the contraption from consultants who promised an engagement spectacle, difficult, fair, and telegenic. Watching the boy, he felt a ripple he hadn't budgeted for. No prep school posture, no curated pedigree, just fluency, humility, and speed. He leaned forward, forearms on knees, measuring not the score but the poise. "Numbers shape leaders," he often said. "Pressure reveals them." Here was pressure transformed into play, as natural as breathing, as disciplined as prayer. Astonishment edged his usually guarded gaze today. Adigun entered the core. He recognized a cipher disguised as whimsy, a switchback pattern hiding inside an innocent spiral. He reversed it instinctively, then split the grid on a diagonal, watering possibility like a gardener tending seedlings before noon heat. The tiles obeyed. He smiled without triumph. the small smile of recognition when a stubborn knot finally loosens. The crowd fell strangely quiet, a congregation faced with an unexpected sermon. Even skeptics leaned in, as though any sound might jinx the momentum. Adigun breathed evenly, set the final trio, and tapped them into place. The timer's digits bled downward relentlessly. 10 minutes were allotted. He needed less. 9 slipped into 8 as the outer columns aligned, and the algorithm of the board exposed its throat. Mapped segments clicked home. Lines met like old friends, and the center glyph stilled, accepting sequence. A presenter's voice rose, then faltered. Someone dropped a bottle cap. It sounded like a bell. Adigun finished with a calm, almost domestic gesture, the way a mother might smooth bedsheets before dawn. The screen flashed confirmation. Under 10 minutes. He exhaled, not quite smiling, already analyzing how he might have done it cleaner, faster, before the world blinked. Applause did not burst. It rolled, building like surf against Bar Beach, disbelief turning into celebration. Children who had laughed now grinned openly. Traders lifted hands, forgetting their wares. Even the skeptical presenter bowed slightly. Showmanship humbled by grace. Phones swung toward the shaded box, where the patron Saturday, Chief Damola, rose a fraction, studying the boy with the startled tenderness a strategist feels on meeting the future earlier than planned. He rested back, nodded once to his aide, and spoke in a voice that carried. "Bring that boy to me tonight." The broadcast captured everything. History inhaled with him. Evening settled over Ajegunle like a heavy cloth, its narrow alleys alive with kerosene lamps, crackling radios, and the smell of frying akara. Children's laughter mixed with the distant thump of generators sputtering back to life after another blackout. Adigun, weary from the day's chaos, crouched near his zinc-walled shack, nibbling on leftover ground nuts. The puzzle board victory already felt like a dream, too distant to hold. Then, the street changed. Engines purred low, powerful, different from the Danfo rattle or Okada hum. A black G-Wagon glided in, its tinted windows swallowing the lamplight. The car stopped at the junction, and 2 men in tailored suits stepped out, broad-shouldered, deliberate in movement. They did not belong to Ajegunle. Children scampered back, wide-eyed. Women with wrappers tied around their waists whispered sharply, pulling their children inside. "Who'd they find for this place with such motor?" someone muttered. The bodyguards scanned the crowd until one pointed directly at Adigun. His stomach tightened. His name was called. Not shouted, but stated with authority that silenced the street. Fear clawed at him. Night had always been dangerous in the slum where shadows hid knives and arguments, but this was different. He had never left Ajegunle after dark, never ridden in a car with doors that shut softly instead of clanging. "Why me?" he asked under his breath. Neighbors' eyes pierced him, suspicion tangled with envy. "Nah, the puzzle boy dem dey call." An old woman hissed, clutching her wrapper tighter. Hands trembling, Adigun placed his tray aside. His feet felt heavy as he moved toward the waiting men. One of the bodyguards opened the rear door, and a burst of chilled air brushed his skin. Adigun hesitated. Inside was leather, smooth, black, perfumed faintly of wood polish. He slid in, heart hammering. The door shut with a muted click that sounded final. Outside, whispers grew louder. The car pulled away, leaving Ajegunle behind in a haze of diesel smoke and curiosity. Adigun pressed his palms to the seat, astonished by its softness. His eyes darted across the polished dashboard, the glowing digital screens, the quiet hum of the AC. Banin unrolled outside the tinted glass like a film, street hawkers fading into boutiques, smoky bukas giving way to neon-lit lounges, the night skyline of Victoria Island rising ahead like a crown of glass and steel, bridges stretched over water, lights dancing across the lagoon. For the first time, he saw the city not as a boy dodging buses but as a passenger cradled by comfort. He pressed his forehead against the cool window, drinking in every moment. Fear slowly gave way to awe. Could this really be happening? He thought of his late-night sketches on cartons, of the puzzles that filled his lonely nights. Somehow, they had led him here. Gliding through Banin in a car that looked like it belonged in foreign movies. The car slowed, turning into a long driveway lined with palm trees lit from below. At the end stood a mansion of glass and stone, its architecture bold and modern. Water streamed down an indoor waterfall visible through transparent walls. Spotlights painted the garden in gold. Silent staff in crisp uniforms stood like statues as the G-Wagon rolled to a halt. The door opened, and the bodyguard motioned for Adigun to step out. His legs wobbled. The marble beneath his bare feet was cold, shining like water. He was ushered past sculptures, through towering glass doors, into a space that swallowed his imagination. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, chandeliers glittered with crystals, and polished floors reflected every light. He felt like an intruder in a palace, his ragged clothes an insult to the perfection around him. Finally, he was led into a dining hall where a long mahogany table stretched beneath chandeliers that shimmered like captured stars. At the head of the table sat Chief Damola Adesina, calm, commanding, every gesture deliberate. Beside him sat his daughter, Sewa, dressed in a simple but elegant gown that carried quiet authority. Her eyes lingered on Adigun, curious, measuring. "Sit," Damola commanded. Adigun obeyed, perching on the edge of a chair upholstered in velvet. His throat was dry. The billionaire's gaze was steady, almost surgical. "Who are you?" he asked, voice deep, words clipped. Adigun's mouth opened, then closed. He had been called many things: groundnut seller, street boy, Ajegunle rat. But he forced his voice steady. "I am Adigun. I sell groundnuts to survive. But I love puzzles. I solve them because they remind me the world has solutions, even when everything feels broken." Damola studied him in silence. The Damola room felt suspended, the ticking of a distant clock loud in the stillness. Finally, another question. "What do you dream of?" Adigun's voice cracked, but he continued. "I dream of building things, machines, tools, anything that makes life easier for people like us. I don't want to die selling groundnuts. I want to create something that will outlive me." His honesty hung in the air like incense, raw and unpolished. Damola's face remained unreadable, but Sewa's eyes softened. She saw not just a boy from the slum, but a spark of hunger that mirrored something in her own guarded heart. The silence stretched until Damola leaned back in his chair. His expression shifted slightly, though still hard to read. He gestured toward the staff, who withdrew quietly, leaving only the three of them in the hall. The billionaire's fingers tapped the table once, twice, then stilled. "From tonight," he said at last, voice steady as granite, "this is your home." Morning broke with a softness Adigun had never known. No rooster crowing, no shouts from hawkers, no hum of generators. Instead, golden sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, bouncing off mirrors and chandeliers that glittered like fragments of the sun itself. He blinked awake beneath silk sheets, smoother than anything his skin had ever touched. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming. The ceiling stretched high above him, white and flawless, and the air was cool, scented faintly with lavender. He sat up slowly, running his hands across the bedding as though it might vanish. His reflection stared back at him from a polished mirror by the wall. It startled him, the same boy from Ajegunle, bare-chested, thin, with eyes still wary of hunger, now framed inside a palace. He rose, padding across the carpet that muffled his footsteps, and opened the door. The hallway stretched endlessly, lined with art and statues, until a maid appeared with a polite bow. "Good morning, sir. Breakfast is ready." "Sir." No one had ever called him that before. She led him to a dining hall, and the sight stopped him in his tracks. A long table groaned beneath a buffet of foods he didn't have names for. Golden croissants, shimmering glasses of juice in colors he'd never seen, bowls of fruits that looked like jewels. Steam curled from eggs, sausages, and pancakes stacked like towers. He stood frozen, tray of groundnuts flashing in his mind. Hunger pushed him forward, but uncertainty made him cautious. He reached for bread, holding it awkwardly. Another maid giggled behind her hand. "First time seeing real food," she whispered to her colleague. Heat rose in his cheeks. But across the table, a different voice spoke, gentle but firm. "You'll get used to it," said Sewa, her tone laced with kindness. She was already seated, sipping tea, her posture graceful, her presence commanding without effort. She gestured toward the spread. "Eat. Don't worry about the stairs." Adigun nodded, chewing slowly, savoring flavors that melted on his tongue like secrets. Not everyone in the mansion shared her kindness. Some staff looked at him with suspicion, their eyes saying what their lips didn't. What is a boy from Ajegunle doing here? A few were openly dismissive, serving him with the stiffness reserved for outsiders. Yet others, like an elderly butler named Adewale, treated him with quiet dignity. "Chief sees something in you," Adewale said one afternoon, adjusting Adigun's collar. "Do not waste it." As days passed, Sewa began seeking him out. At first, their conversations were small questions about the puzzles he loved, about the slum where he came from, but gradually she lingered longer, intrigued by the depth in his answers. She admired his curiosity, the way he noticed details others overlooked. When she asked why he studied puzzles so much, he answered, "Because they remind me the world is not as chaotic as it looks. Somewhere, hidden inside, there is order." She smiled, finding in him a mirror of her own quiet search for meaning. Adigun wandered the mansion like an explorer in a new land. One evening, he stumbled upon the library. It was larger than his entire neighborhood, filled with books that stretched to the ceiling. Titles on technology, design, architecture, and business lined the shelves. His fingers traced spines reverently, as though they were holy relics. Night after night, he returned, reading until his eyes ached. He devoured books on mechanical engineering, sketching ideas in notebooks provided by Sewa. His hunger for knowledge was insatiable, greater than the hunger that once drove him to hawk groundnuts in the Sunday. But wealth came with its trials. Guests frequently visited Chief Damola, men and women in suits that gleamed, their perfumes heavy, their voices louder than necessary. They noticed Adigun in the background, always with a book or quietly serving tea. Snickers followed him. "Is this Chief's charity project?" one whispered. Another laughed. "A mascot from the slums." Their words stung, but Adigun held his silence. One evening, during a dinner gathering, a guest mocked him directly. "Tell me, groundnut boy, do you know which fork to use?" Laughter filled the table. Adigun's pulse raced, but he raised his head calmly. "Forks may matter here," he said softly, "but where I come from, we are taught to use our minds. That is the tool I know best." Silence fell briefly before a few clapped politely. Damola, watching from the head of the table, gave the faintest nod of approval. Each day dazzled him anew, but each day also challenged him. He wrestled with self-doubt, fighting the feeling that he was a trespasser in a world not built for him. Yet each night, he returned to the library, stacking knowledge brick by brick, determined to carve a space where he belonged. From the shadows, however, someone else watched. Among Damola's circle of business allies, the young man named Tobi Adekunle, son of a rival tycoon, noticed the boy's growing presence in the mansion. His eyes narrowed each time Damola's attention flickered toward Adigun. To Tobi, it was an insult that a street boy could share the same space as the children of billionaires. Envy stirred in him, sharp and dangerous. And so, while Adigun buried himself in books, unaware of the storm brewing, a rival quietly marked him as a target. He arrived like a cologne loud without saying a word. Tobi Adekunle, son of Damola's fiercest competitor, swept into the ballroom at Eco Atlantic, with a smile that flashed like chrome and a suit the shade of midnight rain. People parted for him as if the floor had been taught to open. He was the kind of Banin prince who never had to explain himself. His name spoke, his watch ticked authority, his stride edited the air. When his gaze landed on Adigun plain suit, attentive eyes, shoulders squared by stubborn dignity, Tobi's lips curled with a curiosity that already carried contempt. The networking event shimmered with glass and soft jazz. Waiters sailed past with champagne, city views unspooled through transparent walls. In a corner, investors clustered beneath a chandelier and compared exits as though counting pearls. Adigun stood near a display of architectural models, listening more than talking, absorbing the grammar of power, how pauses bought time, how a raised eyebrow could sell an idea. He had learned to be humble without shrinking. It unsettled people who could not place him in their hierarchy. Tobi placed himself within earshot and began his performance. "So," he said, voice pitched for an audience, "our famous puzzle boy has traded groundnuts for hors d'oeuvres." A small circle of onlookers tittered. Sewa, poised beside Adigun, stilled. Adigun turned, meeting Tobi's gaze with a calm that did not ask permission. "I'm Adigun," he said simply. "Good evening." "Ah, mannered too," Tobi drawled. "Tell me, do they teach etiquette in Ajegunle, or did you pick it up from YouTube?" The laughter grew, brittle and eager. Adigun's pulse flickered, but he did not fold into shyness. He tilted his head, considering Tobi as one considers a riddle whose trick is obvious. "Where I come from," Adigun said, "we learn to read faces before we read menus. Saves time." The room caught it a beat late, then broke into laughter, warm this time, relieved, delighted that the underdog had teeth. A few guests clinked glasses, color flared on Tobi's cheekbones, then vanished beneath the practiced chill of rich boy composure. Damola, seated across the hall with a financier from Dubai, watched the exchange as one might watch a chessboard mid-game. He noted the restraint in Adigun, the refusal to punch down or perform rage for clicks. Pressure had not scattered the boy, it had refined him. Quietly, Damola adjusted his cufflink and continued his conversation, but the approval in his eyes did not hide. Tobi tried again, circling Adigun the way a cat circles a closed door. "You've charmed the city," he said, smile razor-thin. "But Banin is a market, not a fairy tale. The stall next to yours sells envy. The one after that sells scandal. Be careful not to buy both." "I'll make sure not to shop at your stall." Laughter cracked louder. Even a cluster of board members who usually smirked at his presence allowed themselves a grin. Sewa's eyes shone with quiet pride, and for a passing second Adigun saw his reflection there, steadier, taller, possible. The humiliation lodged under Tobi's collar like heat. He lifted a flute of champagne and swallowed the sting. Inherited confidence had never prepared him for a boy who could disarm without begging. He leaned close to a journalist he controlled with favors and deadlines, murmuring a few names, a few suggestions. Stories, like perfumes, can be manufactured. Across the evening, rumors began to purl through rooms and private chats. Ajegunle's sudden proximity to Sewa, late-night study sessions that sounded like something else, a narrative of ambition disguised as humility. Nothing concrete, nothing provable, just smoke from a match held near dry grass. People with nothing to say found something to forward. Adigun felt the shift before he heard it. Smiles thinned. A chair he had been invited to occupy was suddenly taken. A handshake became a nod. The fragile acceptance he'd been earning bent beneath a wind he could not see. Belonging, he realized, could be revoked without announcement. He excused himself, stepping onto the terrace where Banin stretched in neon and salt. The lagoon glittered like a promise he did not yet know how to keep. Sewa joined him, arms folded against the evening breeze. "Ignore him," she said, voice low. "Tobi feasts on reaction." Adigun smiled without brightness. "He has the room. I have only the work. That's all that lasts," she replied. The way she said it steadied him. They spoke until the band packed up, a conversation that moved from circuits to childhood to faith and the irreverent hope that kept them both walking. He told her about his first drawing of a water pump on carton. She told him about the loneliness of being surrounded. In the hush between their words, something intimate grew, not flashy but certain, like a light that refuses to flicker during power cuts. Still, in the quiet after the party, doubt returned. He remembered the laughter, the whispers, the sharpness of being measured and found improbable. He went back to the mansion library and read until dawn, copying diagrams with a devotion that felt like prayer. If the city demanded proof, he would flood it. If they wanted pedigree, he would offer performance. He would keep making the room earn him, again and again, until the room forgot to doubt. Elsewhere, Tobi worked the angles. He curated a montage. Old street, photos of Adigun barefoot and unsmiling, the grainy clip of him near Sewa at a gala, a voice note twisted out of context into a cocktail of insinuations. He knew which influencers mistook spice for truth, which gossip pages would post first and apologize never. He scheduled the drop for a weekend night, when attention was restless and hungry. Back in Ajegunle, neighbors huddled around phone screens that brightened courtyards. In Lekki, poolside parties slowed as guests leaned over glowing rectangles. In living rooms from Surulere to Ikoyi, notifications trembled like distant thunder. A headline rose, brutal and catchy, and then another, and then a thread. Comments multiplied like ants over sugar. The city loves a new story more than yesterday's hero. Adigun's phone buzzed on the library table, skittering across polished wood. He glanced at the first message, then the second, then the avalanche. His name flooded timelines, framed by doubts he had never voiced but always feared. The screen showed a world tilting away from him, and the quiet room suddenly felt too bright, too exposed. Social media had exploded. By morning, the city had a verdict wrapped in memes. Timelines swelled with edits that turned Adigun's humility into hunger, his focus into plotting. Clips repeated like curses, threaded with captions that bit: grifter in a borrowed suit, street genius, or social climber. The viral posts did not simply question his talent. They accused him of a single motive: wealth, and of wearing righteousness like a costume he forgot to iron. Those who had clapped at the expo reposted with caution. Those who had doubted him all along found proof where there was only noise. In drawing rooms scented with oud and chilled gin, Banin high society traded gossip like currency. Conversations began with sighs and ended with conclusions. "You know, I always suspected," someone murmured, peering over a marble island. "He moved too fast." Another voice, carefully: "Generous? Smart, yes, but desperate. There is a difference." Screens glowed between canapes and the assumptions multiplied. A single boy's story had become a community project. Everyone wanted to co-author the downfall. Inside the mansion, heat gathered without flames. Hallways felt narrower, mirrors colder. The staff, who had always divided along invisible lines, tilted further apart. Some served Adigun with stiff civility, as though etiquette could disinfect reputation. Others looked through him entirely, silence acting like a verdict. 2 stewards paused their whispering when he entered the pantry. A maid arranged cutlery with the concentration of someone avoiding a glance. Respect, it turned out, could be rented by proximity, but suspicion was owned. Damola's business partners arrived in dark cars and left with lighter smiles. In the study, their voices dropped to velvet. "Chief, you've built a fortress on credibility," one of them said, fingers drumming the leather armrest. "The boy's story is romantic, but your brand cannot debt itself to romance." Another added, "This is not personal, it is perimeter." Damola listened, his face a practiced horizon. He did not promise them anything. He did not defend the boy either. When they left, the room smelled of caution. Adigun felt it most in the library, where he had once sat like a pilgrim at the gates of knowledge. The books did not change, but the air did. He read a page 3 times and could not make the words stand still. Between sentences, his mind replayed the edits, the captions, the smirks. He set his pencil down, picked it up, set it down again. Even quiet had turned its back on him. He wondered if ambition was a beautiful trap designed to fail the uninvited. Sewa found him tracing a circuit diagram without seeing it. "Look at me," she said softly. He did. "Noise is not truth," she continued. "Noise is hunger pretending to be a chorus." Her certainty steadied him, for a moment, the way a handrail steadies feet on a shaking bridge. But the tremor returned when a butler entered with rehearsed politeness. "Chief will be in meetings all evening." It sounded like a door closing 2 rooms away. He tried to become small. Tidier steps, fewer words, shorter glances. He ate quickly, avoided the grand corridors, returned to the guest wing before the lamps dimmed. But smallness is a poor strategy for a heart trained to solve. Loneliness slipped back like an old language he wished he had forgotten. He lay on the silk sheets and listened to the air conditioning hum, a rich man's lullaby that could not put him to sleep. On the 3rd night after the scandal, he rose without switching on the light. He folded his borrowed blazer, set it on the chair, took nothing else. The guards at the gate recognized him and did not argue. Perhaps they felt mercy, perhaps they preferred peace. The city received him with diesel breath and open gutters, with the rough welcome of home. He boarded a keke without bargaining and watched the glass skyline recede as if he had imagined it. Ajegunle did not pretend surprise. Neighbors gathered their verdicts like laundry. "So the fairy tale done end," a man announced, leaning on a wooden stall. A woman clucked her tongue. "I talk am. Those people no carry person like us finish." Children stared with curious cruelty, then ran off to chase a punctured ball. He smiled where he could, nodded where he couldn't. The zinc roofs still sang when the wind passed. The alleys still perfumed themselves with smoke and salt. The past did not congratulate him for returning. He walked to the lagoon at dusk, where the water learned city light and taught it to tremble. Barges moved like slow animals in the distance. The sky bruised itself into violet. He sat on a broken concrete ledge, elbows on knees, face in his hands. He could not unsee the comments. He could not unknow how easily rooms could exile a guest. He counted his failures like beads, then lost count. For the first time since the puzzle board, he wondered if his stubbornness was just an expensive hobby for a poor boy. Footsteps approached, light as a question. "You disappeared," Sewa said, breathless from the path, scarf pulled over her hair. He turned, startled, then shook his head with a helpless half-laugh. "I don't belong there," he said. "I never did. I borrowed a future that doesn't fit." She sat beside him, not too close, not timid either. Water lapped at the concrete like a patient dog. "You belonged because you made yourself necessary," she said. "And because you refused to be cruel. That room needs both, even if it forgets." He stared at the ripples. "They think I want only money." She considered this. "Let them think it while you build the truth. Noise is cheap, work is expensive." The wind lifted her scarf. The city threw its lights at the water again. Silence held them, tight but kind. She told him that some of Damola's partners were pressing, that caution was staining everything, that power tended to measure generosity by risk. He listened, then looked at his hands, thin, scarred, still steady. The boy who had traced ciphers on carton was not gone. He was simply seated beside a different kind of riddle. He rose, brushed dust from his trousers, and faced the water squarely, as though it were a mirror. His chest filled with the old electricity that visited whenever the problem was worthy. He understood, suddenly, that the city had presented another puzzle, this one built from doubt and time. He straightened, and his voice found steel. "I will rebuild myself from nothing." Ajegunle was never quiet, but the noise was different when Adigun returned, not mocking this time, not accusing, but curious. He no longer carried a tray of groundnuts. Instead, he carried chalk, cardboard squares, and bottle caps. The children followed him as if the alley were a classroom, their eyes bright, their questions spilling over like water in a cracked bucket. "Teacher Genius," they called. A name born of play but tinged with respect. He smiled every time, though the title felt heavier than his thin shoulders. At first, the lessons were simple, puzzles scratched on abandoned plywood, numbers scribbled in chalk on zinc walls. But Adigun's mind refused simplicity for long. He cut shapes from discarded cartons, painted colors with leftover dye from a neighbor's stall, and crafted games that turned arithmetic into contests. A multiplication race became as thrilling as football. Fractions transformed into bottle cap mosaics, fractions of circles they could touch. Children who once dodged homework now chased equations like treasure. The slum itself became his classroom. A crooked table served as a board, a broken bench as a desk. His students arrived barefoot, faces dusty, notebooks patched with tape, yet their laughter filled the alleys, carrying beyond the rusted roofs. Mothers leaned on doorframes, half smiling as they watched their children chant numbers instead of insults. "Na real genius," one woman said, shaking her head. "I know they use cane." But children they learn fast. It was during one of these lessons that Ify, a young tech blogger, stumbled upon him. Her camera hung loosely around her neck, her eyes sharp with the instinct to capture stories. She had come to film daily life in Ajegunle, but found herself stopping in the middle of the alley, drawn by the sound of children clapping in rhythm to an equation game. She began recording, zooming in on Adigun as he crouched among them, his voice steady, his eyes alive. Later that evening, she posted a clip titled "Street Genius of Ajegunle, Teaching Maths with Trash." Within hours, it trended. The internet, so quick to crucify, now leaned forward in awe. The boy once painted as a fraud was suddenly a vision of possibility, not tied to any billionaire's shadow. The comments shifted. "This is the Nigeria we need. How can I support this boy? Please, someone connect him to investors." Ify returned the next day, then the next, becoming both documentarian and amplifier. Her edits highlighted not just Adigun's cleverness but his patience, the way he bent down to a child's height, the way his chalk moved like art on zinc. Soon, major pages reposted her clips. Schools in Abuja and Port Harcourt shared his games as inspiration. A radio station invited him for a phone interview. He spoke softly but firmly, saying, "Every child deserves to know they can solve something. Once you solve a puzzle, you believe you can solve life." Crowdfunding links began to appear under Ify's videos. Small donations trickled in from Nigerians abroad, each one carrying the weight of hope. 500 here, 2,000 there, then larger sums from strangers who wanted to see a boy's vision turn into tools. With the money, Adigun bought better chalk, second-hand whiteboards, and a set of tablets donated by a diaspora group. He designed his first true educational tool, a cardboard and software hybrid game that taught fractions and logic to children with or without electricity. His reputation, once bruised by gossip, began to rebuild. Not as Damola's protege, not as Sewa's rumored companion, but as the street genius, a title that stuck across Nigeria. Newspapers ran features, radio stations asked for updates. A philanthropist offered him a chance to expand his classes into a formal community center. Even those who had mocked him now spoke with reluctant admiration. That boy gets sense. Him, no give up. But not everyone was pleased. From glossy boardrooms and rooftop lounges, Tobi Adekunle scrolled through his phone with growing disgust. Each headline was a thorn. He had orchestrated the scandal, spent energy turning society against Adigun, and yet here he was rising without apology, without pedigree. Tobi's fury deepened each time he saw Sewa's name mentioned in connection to the street genius. He began to see not just a rival but a threat, one who was gaining something Tobi could not buy, authentic love from the people. Still, Adigun paid him no mind. His focus was the children, the puzzles, the dream that learning could be joy. Each evening, when the lagoon reflected city lights across the slum, he wrote sketches of new inventions, his mind racing with how education could leap barriers. He was no longer waiting for validation from mansions. He was building his own ground, brick by brick, puzzle by puzzle. Then came the invitation, a letter embossed with the seal of the Banin Innovation Expo, hand-delivered by a representative who stood out like a lighthouse in Ajegunle's alleys. "We would like you," the man announced formally, "to present your work at the expo. The city wants to hear your story." Children clapped, mothers gasped, and neighbors stared as though the air itself had spoken prophecy. Adigun held the envelope in his hands, the weight of possibility pressing into his skin. This was no puzzle scratched on carton, no accidental audience in a slum alley. This was Banin at its brightest, opening its stage for him. The children gathered around, chanting, "Teacher genius, teacher genius," as though crowning him with rhythm. His throat tightened, but he smiled, looking toward the horizon where skyscrapers gleamed. The world had once doubted him, crushed him, mocked him, but now it was calling again. And this time, he would answer. The Banin Innovation Expo was a cathedral of ambition, its glass domes gleaming under the morning Sunday. Flags of sponsors fluttered outside the convention center, while sleek cars lined the driveway. Inside, the air buzzed with anticipation, a gathering of Nigeria's brightest minds, CEOs, investors, tech founders, and curious students hoping to glimpse the future. Screens looped highlight reels of startups. Drones zipped overhead for live-stream footage, and a low hum of conversation rolled like tidewater across the vast hall. Backstage, Adigun tugged at the sleeves of his borrowed suit. It was a size too big, the shoulders stiff, the collar pressing against his throat. His palms were damp, but his eyes held focus. He had not come here for comfort. He had come here for proof. Ifi adjusted his tie, her camera already set up to record the moment. "Don't look at the suit," she whispered. "Look at the idea. That's what they'll see." His name was called. Applause greeted him, polite at first, curious. He stepped onto the stage, the lights blinding, the silence heavy. He looked across the audience and spotted her Sewa, seated in the second row, phone in hand, recording. Her eyes shone with pride that pierced through the glare. His heart steadied. He began. "This," Adigun said, holding up a tablet, "is not just an app, it is a puzzle. And like every puzzle, it is meant to be solved not by me, but by children across Nigeria who deserve to see learning as play." His voice wavered at first, but soon it strengthened. He demonstrated his creation, a puzzle-based educational tool that turned maths into games. Fractions became shapes children could slide. Equations became riddles with colors. He showed videos of children in Ajegunle laughing as they learned, bottle caps and cardboard alongside the digital version. The hall shifted, heads leaned forward, CEOs who had been scrolling paused. A founder whispered to an investor, nodding toward the screen. The applause began mid-presentation, bursts of claps that grew into steady thunder. Adigun moved with growing confidence, his voice rising, his gestures natural. The boy who once scribbled on carton was now teaching a hall full of billion-naira suits. When he finished, the silence lasted one breath too long, then the hall erupted. Applause, whistles, cheers, cameras flashed. Investors raised hands immediately, offering contacts, mentorship, and funding. "This is the kind of innovation we need," one declared, loud enough for all to hear. Adigun bowed his head, overwhelmed, fighting back the sting in his eyes. From her seat, Sewa's phone captured everything: the way he stood tall, the way the crowd surged toward him, the way his face lit up not with pride but with relief. She smiled, knowing he was stepping into the world on his own merit. But not everyone smiled. At the back of the hall, Tobi Adekunle scrolled furiously on his phone, lips tight. He had prepared his play. Minutes later, gossip sites began posting. Street Genius app stolen? Screenshots appeared, manipulated to suggest that Adigun had copied a foreign design. A hashtag gathered speed. Number fake genius. Murmurs spread in the room as phones lit up, heads bent, whispers circling like vultures. Adigun noticed the shift, the ripple of doubt crawling across faces. His chest tightened. Was history repeating itself? Then, just as the tension thickened, Ify strode to the side of the stage with her laptop. She plugged into the hall's display system and projected a series of time-stamped videos, recordings of Adigun and Ajegunle, designing prototypes from carton, testing games with children, developing the software step by painstaking step. The audience gasped as the truth played out. Then she cued the final clip, a leaked recording of Tobi himself, instructing an associate to make the fraud story stick. The room froze. Every eye turned toward the back, where Tobi stood, phone still in hand, his face pale despite the dim light. A wave of murmurs swelled, then laughter, then jeers. Cameras whipped toward him, influencers typing furiously. Within minutes, number Tobi the liar trended above his attempted sabotage. Humiliation settled on him like chains. He tried to leave quietly, but the cameras followed, recording his stiff walk of shame. The hall returned its gaze to Adigun, now not just a presenter but a survivor of sabotage, his dignity intact. Investors redoubled their offers, eager to be associated with his resilience. Adigun swallowed, standing straighter. He had come here to prove himself, and the city had seen. His grassroots company was born in that moment, not from charity, not from pity, but from undeniable innovation. The applause roared again, filling the hall like a tide. And then, silence fell once more. Not because of doubt, not because of sabotage, but because the man who entered commanded it. Chief Damola Adesina walked onto the stage, his tailored suit glinting under the lights, his presence impossible to ignore. The crowd parted with their eyes, whispers tumbling in his wake. Sewa lowered her phone, her breath caught. Adigun froze, his heart pounding. Damola approached slowly, his face unreadable, his gaze fixed on the boy who had turned puzzles into a movement. He took the microphone, his voice calm but heavy with intent. The hall held its breath. The microphone felt like a scepter in Chief Damola Adesina's hand. His presence silenced even the loudest claps, as though the entire expo had been waiting for this moment. He stood beside Adigun, a titan beside a boy who had once sold groundnuts on the streets, and let the pause linger until the hall leaned forward collectively. His voice, when it came, was steady. Each word weighed like currency. "Ladies and gentlemen," Damola began, his gaze sweeping across the crowd, "you have witnessed something rare today. Not merely innovation, not merely intelligence, but resilience, the kind of resilience that is born in struggle, sharpened in rejection, and polished by persistence." He turned slightly toward Adigun, his eyes softer than usual. "I misjudged this boy. I thought talent alone brought him to my door, but what I see today is greater than talent. I see purpose." The room erupted into applause, flashes of cameras exploding like fireworks. Adigun's chest tightened, humility and vindication wrestled inside him. Damola raised his hand for silence and continued, "From today, Adigun will not stand outside looking in. He will work beside me. I offer him official partnership in the Adesina Foundation's education projects to expand learning across this nation." The announcement landed like thunder. Journalists scrambled, headlines writing themselves before their pens touched paper. "Street boy becomes billionaire's protege." Influencers tweeted furiously. Hashtags soared. Adigun's face appeared on live feeds, his name etched into the evening like prophecy. He could barely breathe. The vindication was overwhelming, yet it humbled him further. This was not a reward for solving a puzzle, nor a rescue from pity. It was recognition of his journey, his defiance, his refusal to disappear when scandal tried to erase him. He bowed slightly, whispering into the microphone, "Thank you. I will not waste this." The hall roared. From her seat, Sewa's eyes glistened. She clapped harder than anyone else, phone forgotten in her lap. The cameras caught her gaze lingering on him, and soon whispers began rippling. Is there more between them than mentorship? Social media picked it up instantly. Clips of her smile beside his became fodder for threads speculating about romance between the billionaire's daughter and the street-born genius. Neither confirmed, neither denied, but the glances between them became their own language, invisible yet undeniable. That night, back in Ajegunle, Adigun refused to forget his roots. Despite the glittering offers, he walked through the alleys with chalk in his pocket. Children shouted, "Teacher genius!" as he returned to the broken table that had birthed his dream. By lantern light, he conducted free evening classes, puzzles etched onto zinc walls, math sung in clapping rhythms. Mothers gathered at doorframes, smiling. Neighbors shook their heads in disbelief, muttering, "The boy Don carry Ajegunle, go Expo." His life became a double existence. By day, he stood in boardrooms with billionaires, presenting frameworks for education, reviewing proposals with Damola, learning the grammar of influence. By night, he knelt in the dust of Ajegunle, teaching children to see numbers as friends. The contrast deepened him. Wealth dazzled, but the slum grounded him. Every polished floor reminded him of zinc roofs, every chandelier of flickering kerosene lamps. He lived between two worlds, determined not to lose either. Damola noticed. At first he watched quietly, measuring the boy's balance between humility and ambition. Then he began to test him. He assigned him to oversee small projects, then larger ones, community learning centers in Mushin, partnerships with NGOs. Adigun handled each task with diligence, sometimes stumbling but never quitting. He learns fast, Damola told a board member one evening, and he learns hungry. That hunger is a gift. But hunger is also dangerous. Whispers reached Damola of investors questioning whether Adigun's rising star would overshadow the Adesina brand. Rivals murmured about grooming a threat. Even some allies suggested caution. Yet Damola pressed on, giving Adigun more room to grow, his expression unreadable. One evening, in the mansion library where Adigun had once lost himself among dusty spines, Damola entered quietly. He found the boy bent over a blueprint, pencil smudges on his hands, eyes burning with focus. "You remind me of someone," Damola said, breaking the silence. Adigun looked up, startled. "Who?" Damola walked to the shelves, tracing a book spine with his finger. His voice dropped, weighted with memory. "Myself. Years ago. Before the wealth. Before the suits. Before the world pretended to know my story." He paused, his back to Adigun. "But there is something you don't know about me. Something I have buried. Because the world believes billionaires are born without scars." Adigun frowned, sensing gravity in his tone. "What do you mean?" Damola turned slowly, his lit eyes shadowed but unflinching. "I was not born into power. I was not handed this empire. My beginnings were closer to yours than you can imagine." The words hung in the air, heavy, dangerous, opening a door to a past Adigun never guessed existed. The library smelled of leather, ink, and secrets. Damola stood by the window, his silhouette framed by the soft glow of Banin lights beyond the glass. His voice carried the weight of years when he finally spoke. "I was not born into this world of glass walls and chandeliers. I rose from mud, from dust, from hunger you can still taste in your dreams. But my rise was not clean, Adigun. It was ruthless." Adigun leaned forward, every nerve sharpened. He had always seen Damola as a titan, untouchable, unshakable. To hear him admit to shadows in his journey felt like watching marble crack. "I clawed my way up," Damola continued, his tone even. "I fought competitors who wanted me invisible, I betrayed allies when survival demanded it, and I cut ties with family who thought sentiment was stronger than strategy. Wealth does not arrive with kindness. It arrives with sharp edges, and only those willing to bleed keep it. He turned, his gaze hard. Understand this, boy. Money changes people. It erases some bonds, distorts others, and tests the strongest until they snap. Adigun swallowed. The words burned, yet they carried truth. Before he could respond, Sewa entered the library, having overheard the last fragments. Her eyes flashed. "Father," she said firmly, "you speak as though cruelty is the only map. But compassion is not weakness. It is a currency of its own, one you refuse to spend." Damola's jaw tightened. Compassion delays decisions. It ties hands. It feeds the poor today but starves the empire tomorrow. Sewa stepped closer, her voice steady but filled with fire. "And yet, without compassion, what is the empire for? What is wealth if it only builds walls and never bridges?" Silence between father and daughter pulsed. Adigun felt himself caught in the crossfire, torn between the ruthless reality Damola described and the gentler truth Sewa defended. His mind reeled back to nights of hunger, to his mother's cracked voice telling him not to lose hope, to the laughter of children in Ajegunle as they solved his puzzles. He realized he could never let ambition erase those memories. They were his compass. Inwardly, he vowed never to forget the slum alleys, the zinc roofs, the taste of cold gari. Empathy, he decided, was not a chain, it was the anchor that kept him from floating into arrogance. Yet, ambition tugged at him too. Could he balance both? Could he build bridges without being consumed by wolves who tore them down? Damola watched him wrestle with the questions, a faint smirk at the corner of his lips. "Good," he said softly. "You are thinking. That is what separates heirs from pawns." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You remind me of myself, Adigun. Not in gentleness, not in speech, but in the hunger. That hunger is what I respect and fear, for I know it does not fade, it only waits for a stage." The words landed heavily. Adigun realized Damola no longer saw him only as a protege. He saw him as a mirror, perhaps even a rival. Their bond shifted in that moment, part mentorship, part duel. Every task Damola assigned afterward was not only a lesson but also a test, each one laced with the silent question, "Are you worthy of my legacy, or are you my replacement waiting to happen?" And Adigun did not shrink from the weight. He grew sharper. In meetings, he asked questions that unsettled executives. In negotiations, he noticed loopholes others missed. He handled business briefs with boldness that startled even seasoned managers. More than once, Damola caught him dismantling complex problems with puzzle logic, turning abstract numbers into human solutions. Each victory felt like a step closer to power, and each step brought admiration from some and envy from others. Through it all, Sewa watched. Her admiration deepened into something unspoken, something that sat in her gaze each time she found him late at night in the library. Books spread before him, his pencil racing across blueprints. She admired not just his mind, but the way he carried both his scars and his dreams. In conversations under the mansion's glass ceilings, they shared visions of schools, community hubs, and futures less cruel than her father's met. Their closeness grew undeniable, though they spoke carefully, as though words might break what silence already confirmed. Damola noticed too. He said nothing at first, though his eyes lingered longer on them when they spoke. Perhaps he wondered if love was distraction or destiny. Perhaps he feared it was both. One evening, as the three sat in the drawing room after a long day of meetings, Damola finally broke the silence. His voice was calm, almost casual, but his eyes glinted with steel. "Adigun," he said, "you have walked into rooms you were never meant to enter. You have stood under lights meant to blind you. Yet you are still here, sharper than before." Adigun inclined his head respectfully, waiting. "But now," Damola continued, "we must see if you are more than a survivor. We must see if you can lead." Sewa glanced at her father, tension in her shoulders. "Father," Damola raised a hand, silencing her gently. His gaze returned to Adigun. "One final challenge. If you succeed, you will not only prove yourself, you will earn a place no one can take from you. If you fail, then perhaps you were meant to remain a story of promise, not fulfillment." The air tightened, the fire in the hearth crackling louder. Adigun's pulse raced, but he met Damola's stare without flinching. "What is the challenge?" he asked. Damola leaned back, a shadow crossing his face. "You will know soon enough." The summons came on a Monday morning, sharp as glass. Damola stood in his office, its walls lined with panoramic windows overlooking the restless Banin lagoon. His voice was calm, but the gravity in it made the words echo. "You will lead tomorrow's partnership meeting, not me, you." Adigun froze. This was no ordinary meeting. It was the long-awaited negotiation with an international consortium of investors from Dubai, London, and Johannesburg figures who commanded empires with handshakes. Billionaires, ministers, and Banin elites would be in attendance. One misstep could cost billions. One misstep could end the fragile trust Damola had placed in him. But hesitation was a luxury Adigun had never owned. He nodded, though his pulse raced like a drum. "I'll be ready." That night, he sat in the library, papers spread across the table, diagrams filling the margins of his notes. He approached the numbers like puzzles, breaking them into patterns, translating complex forecasts into simple narratives. Hours bled into dawn, his mind refusing rest. Sewa found him slumped over calculations, pencil smudges across his hands. She touched his shoulder lightly. "You don't need to be perfect," she whispered. "You only need to be you." The next day, the hall at Eco Hotel glittered with expectation. Chandeliers rained light upon a sea of suits, silk gowns, and glinting jewelry. Cameras rolled discreetly. Journalists sharpened their pens. Adigun entered in a tailored suit Damola had insisted he wear, his movements measured, his shoulders squared, though his heart thudded like a drum in his chest. At the head of the long table sat the consortium leaders, flanked by Damola's board members and government dignitaries. Damola introduced him with deliberate brevity. "This is Adigun. He will lead today's discussion." Every gaze pivoted toward the boy who once sold groundnuts in traffic. Adigun inhaled, then began. His voice trembled slightly at first, but quickly steadied. He spoke of Nigeria's future not in dense jargon, but in puzzle metaphors. "Think of this market as a board with scattered tiles," he explained. "Individually, they seem chaotic, but when placed correctly, they form an image. Our role is not to control the board, it is to reveal the picture waiting beneath." Slides flickered behind him, not overloaded with data but simplified into clean visuals that told a story. He dismantled risk projections by comparing them to misaligned puzzle pieces, then showed how alignment generated profit. He spoke of community projects not as charity, but as infrastructure that multiplied long-term returns. Each explanation transformed the intimidating weight of billions into ideas so clear the investors leaned in, scribbling notes. Questions came, sharp and skeptical. "How do you intend to mitigate currency volatility?" asked a man from London, brows arched. Adigun smiled faintly. "You don't fight volatility head-on. You create buffers. It is like solving a crossword. You do not know every word at once, but the letters you confirm reduce uncertainty for the rest." The investor chuckled, impressed. A woman from Dubai pressed harder. "And political risk?" Adigun's reply was steady. "Every system has gaps. Instead of fearing them, we design models that work around them. Like water, business must find the cracks and flow through." His metaphor disarmed her skepticism, leaving nods in its place. The room shifted. What began as quiet scrutiny evolved into engagement, then admiration. Even the seasoned elites whispered among themselves, astonished at the clarity of the boy whose story they thought they knew. By the time Adigun concluded, the hall felt charged with possibility. He ended not with profit projections, but with vision. This deal is not just about returns. It is about creating order in the seeming chaos of our nation, proving that brilliance can rise from anywhere if given a chance. That is the picture I see, and I invite you to complete it with us. Silence stretched for a heartbeat. Then applause erupted, filling the hall like thunder rolling across Bar Beach. Investors clapped. Board members rose. Even the dignitaries, usually stoic, joined in. The deal was sealed, Millions pledged, partnerships signed. From the head of the table, Damola's lips curved into something rare, a true smile. He nodded once, pride in his eyes, not just the pride of a mentor, but of a man who had found a son. The board members glanced between them, realizing a new chapter had been written. Across the room, Sewa's eyes shimmered with tears she did not hide. She clapped until her palms stung, her gaze fixed on him. Adigun met her eyes briefly, and in that look, words passed unspoken. When the hall finally emptied, and the signatures dried on glossy pages, Damola pulled Adigun aside. His voice was quiet but edged with warning. Power is loud. It attracts envy louder. Remember, success creates as many enemies as friends. Stay sharp. That night, under the quiet glow of the mansion's balcony, Adigun and Sewa stood together, the lagoon stretching dark and endless below. The city lights flickered like distant puzzles waiting to be solved. Adigun turned to her, his voice unsteady but certain. Sewa, he said, I cannot leave this unsaid any longer. I love you, not because of where we are, but because of who you are in every silence, every word, every belief you carry. For a long moment, she simply looked at him, her face unreadable in the moonlight. Then she stepped closer, her voice low but fierce. I have loved you, she whispered, since the first puzzle. The night stilled, heavy with promise, just as destiny knocked again on their door. They began to call him the street genius, as if the title had always waited at the edge of his name, and soon it echoed from market stalls to newsroom, studios. Television anchors pronounced it with ceremony. Pupils in distant towns wrote it in exercise books as a dream they could hold. Adigun wore the name lightly. Like a jacket he refused to let define his skin. What mattered to him were the mornings, the doors opening at his learning hubs across Banin and beyond, the hum of tablets booting, the chorus of children laughing at maths that no longer frightened them. His startup grew like light across water, beginning with a single center in Ajegunle and rippling outward to Mushin, Makoko, Surulere, then Ibadan, Port Harcourt, Kano. Each hub was an ecosystem. Solar-charged stations, refurbished tablets, puzzle walls, and community mentors trained to teach with play instead of fear. The software evolved with each cohort, learning the learners as much as they learned it. Parents who once measured futures by luck now measured them by modules completed, projects built, confidence gained. Scholarships bloomed like jacaranda in rainy season, purple proofs against hopelessness. Children arrived barefoot and left walking on possibilities. They learned to drag fractions across screens like constellations, to reason through patterns, to say I can without apology. Former hawkers became peer tutors. Shy girls found their voices solving logic quests in front of friends. A slender boy from Makoko designed a low-cost flood alert using puzzle algorithms from the app. A seamstress's daughter built a budgeting game that taught her mother to stretch profits without guesswork. In classrooms that had known chalk dust and dread, laughter now kept time like a metronome. Through it all walked Sewa, equal parts partner and lighthouse. She moved between boardrooms and back streets with the same steady grace, translating the language of investors into strategies that never forgot humans at the center. In project meetings, she sharpened ideas. In crowded alleys, she carried clipboards and empathy. Their love never needed a press release. It was threaded through night debriefs on the balcony, through field visits where they knelt beside kids tracing shapes with chalk, through arguments that ended not in victory but in clearer purpose. Their partnership braided affection and ambition until both were stronger. One afternoon, at a foundation summit, Chief Damola stood beneath a soft wash of lights and made official what time had already declared. This work, he said, voice low and resonant, belongs to the future more than it belongs to me. Today, I name Adigun the heir to our education foundation. The audience rose, the applause warm rather than explosive, the kind that acknowledges inevitability. Damola's eyes found Adigun's, holding pride, warning, and something tender enough to be mistaken for relief. In the private afterglow, he clasped the younger man's shoulder and whispered, "Build beyond me." The media feasted, but for once the story refused scandal. Headlines crowned the tale with grace. Puzzle Boy. Photos showed children at tablets brighter than yesterday's rumors, showed Adigun and Sewa beside community leaders, showed Damola letting a different future step to the microphone. Comment sections so often, battlegrounds filled with teachers swapping tips, with parents asking where to enroll, with alumni promising to volunteer on Saturdays. For a season, Nigeria looked at itself and saw a mirror that reflected courage. Some characters faded as the camera moved. Tobi Adekunle drifted through parties where no one asked for a story, only a refill. He still wore watches that counted the price of time, but the rooms no longer orbited him. His name trended less, his opinions echoed softer. Jealousy, once hot enough to forge weapons, cooled into something dull and heavy he could not put down. Now and then he scrolled past a clip of a laughing classroom and felt a twinge he misnamed boredom. Perhaps envy is a math that never balances. Adigun refused to hoard spotlight. He built bridges the way he solved puzzles, by finding edges first, then the quiet connectors. He brought corporate leaders into the slums without spectacle, pairing them with local teachers who knew the names behind the numbers. He convinced markets to host weekend learning corners and convinced universities to send mentors who returned, changed. He argued for policy shifts with diagrams so clear even cynics nodded, and he left meetings with funding tied not to vanity metrics but to impact milestones a child could track. Rich and poor began to share sentences, then projects, then pride. At home, he never believed his life would hold glass walls, open to a city that glittered like possibility poured into a bowl. On the balcony, the lagoon breathed in and out, taming neon into jewelry on water. Adigun leaned on the railing most nights, the breeze lifting the edges of his shirt, the day's noise settling into a hum. He thought of crosswords smudged by sweat, of cartons dark with charcoal, of neighbors who had laughed from balconies now repaired by scholarships and jobs. The past was not a ghost, it was a root. Beside him, Sewa rested her head against his shoulder, the familiarity of the gesture deepening rather than dulling its sweetness. "Another hub signed in Kaduna," she murmured, "and the Makoko alert system is shortlisted for an African innovation grant." He exhaled a smile. They spoke of scaling without losing soul, of the stubbornness required to stay soft, of the long road left. Love, they had learned, was not a prize at the end of arrival. It was a discipline that kept arrival from turning into arrogance. He closed his eyes and listened to generators far away, to water near, to a city learning the sound of its better self. When he opened them, the skyline did not feel like a fence anymore. It felt like a horizon his work could meet. The boy who had once traced engines on carton now traced futures on policy, on platforms, on hearts. He had not solved poverty. He had solved a shape within it and shown others how to keep solving. He spoke softly, a benediction and a promise. "Every puzzle has a solution. My life was the hardest one of all." Adigun's journey proves that no matter how hard life's puzzle is, there's always a solution. What do you think? Can resilience truly rewrite destiny? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next powerful story.